January 29th, 1945. Holzheim, Belgium. 4 American soldiers kneel in the snow, hands behind their heads, disarmed, surrounded by 80 German prisoners who are no longer prisoners. This wasn't supposed to happen. 20 minutes ago, these Germans were defeated, captured, contained. 20 minutes ago, Company C of the 508th Parachute Infantry had secured this village at the cost of exhaustion, frostbite, and ammunition they couldn't spare. Now, because of one decision, a single tactical calculation made under impossible pressure, 90 armed enemy soldiers are about to attack from the rear and annihilate an entire American company. The decision seemed reasonable at the time, logical even. Leave 4 men to guard 80 prisoners, just for a few minutes, just until reinforcements arrive. But in war, reasonable decisions kill people. This is the story of what happens when command runs out of options. When you don't have enough men, enough time, enough anything, and you make the only choice available, knowing it might be catastrophic. This is the story of the 4-man mistake that nearly ended in massacre, and of the first sergeant who had to clean it up. Background: the arithmetic of survival. To understand why 4 men were guarding 80 prisoners, you need to understand what the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment looked like by January 1945. They were supposed to be elite, airborne, the best trained, best equipped soldiers in the American Army. By the time they reached the Ardennes, they were a ghost of that ideal. The regiment had jumped into Normandy on D-Day. Scattered across 50 miles of French countryside, they fought for 33 days straight. No relief, no replacements, no rest. When they finally pulled back to England, the 508th had suffered 40% casualties. 3 months later, they jumped into Holland for Operation Market Garden, another bloodbath. The British paratroopers at Arnhem were annihilated. The American airborne units fared better, but better meant only losing 25% of your strength instead of 75%. Then came the Bulge, December 16, 1944. Hitler's last desperate gamble. 3 German armies, 400,000 men, smashed through thinly held American lines in the Ardennes forest. The surprise was total. The weather was lethal. The casualties were staggering. The 82nd Airborne was rushed to Belgium to plug the gap. Not by parachute this time. There wasn't time. They went by truck, riding through the night in open vehicles, temperatures below zero, arriving at the front exhausted and frozen. By January 1945, Company C of the 508th was operating at 60% strength. They didn't have enough riflemen, didn't have enough machine gunners, didn't have enough squad leaders, platoon sergeants, or junior officers. What they had was a mission. Clear German forces from a series of Belgian villages along the offensive's collapsing shoulder. First Sergeant Leonard Funk looked at his roster and did the math. To take Holzheim, a village of perhaps 15 buildings, maybe 50 German defenders, he needed at least 80 men for a proper assault. He had 30 combat effectives. The rest of Company C was scattered across other objectives, under strength themselves, fighting their own battles with their own shortages. So Funk made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. He walked to the company headquarters tent. Inside were clerks, supply personnel, cooks, men whose military occupational specialties didn't include close combat in sub-zero temperatures. Most had never fired their rifles at another human being. Funk told them, "You're infantry now. Grab your weapons." This is what the Ardennes did to the American Army. It consumed men faster than the replacement system could provide them. Units that were supposed to rest, refit, and train new soldiers instead went back into the line at half strength, using whoever was available. The march to Holzheim was 15 miles. Waist-deep snow, driving blizzard, German artillery harassing them from the flanks. By the time they reached the village, Funk's makeshift force was already depleted by exposure and exhaustion. The assault itself was textbook. Funk led from the front. He always did. They cleared 15 houses methodically, machine guns, rifles, grenades. The Germans fought hard but were overwhelmed. 30 prisoners captured by Funk's element, 50 more by another unit on the opposite side of town. 80 total. And now, Funk faced another impossible calculation. Standard doctrine for handling prisoners of war requires 1 guard for every 10 prisoners under controlled conditions. For 80 hostile combatants in an active combat zone, you'd want at least 16 guards, 2 full squads, positioned to provide overlapping security. Funk had 30 men total, and the fighting in Holzheim wasn't over. Scattered German soldiers still held positions in other parts of the village. Company C was spread thin, clearing houses, securing perimeters, dealing with casualties from the assault. Funk looked at his prisoners, looked at his exhausted men, and made the decision. 4 guards. That's all he could spare. He chose them carefully. Experienced soldiers. Men who'd been through Normandy, Holland, the Bulge. Men who knew how to handle prisoners, how to watch for trouble, how to react if something went wrong. He told them, "Keep them here. We'll send reinforcements when we can." Then he went back to finish securing the village. It was a reasonable decision. Logical. The kind of compromise battlefield commanders make 100 times a day when reality doesn't match doctrine. And it was a disaster waiting to happen. Building tension. When the calculation breaks. The prisoners sat in the farmhouse courtyard, hands visible, weapons piled 20 feet away under guard. For about 10 minutes, everything held. Then the German patrol arrived. Later, intelligence would piece together what happened. A German unit, probably 10 to 20 men, had been operating independently when Holzheim fell. Cut off from their parent formation, wearing white winter camouflage, they approached the village cautiously. In the snow and confusion, they looked like American troops in winter gear. By the time the 4 guards realized these weren't friendlies, it was too late. The German patrol didn't hesitate. They knew exactly what they were seeing. 4 enemy soldiers guarding 80 of their own. The mathematics of the situation were obvious. They rushed the position. The 4 American guards never had a chance. Outnumbered 20 to 1, surrounded, they were disarmed in seconds, forced to their knees, hands behind their heads. Now the prisoners weren't prisoners anymore. And the German officer in charge, probably a lieutenant, maybe a captain, immediately understood the opportunity in front of him. 80 freshly freed German soldiers. A pile of weapons within arm's reach. An American company scattered across the village, distracted by ongoing combat, completely unaware that 90 enemy soldiers were now organizing behind their lines. The German officer began giving orders. "Arm yourselves. Position the machine guns here and here. We're going to hit them from the rear." This is where command failure cascades into catastrophe. Company C had no reserve. Every available soldier was committed to clearing the village. There was no quick reaction force, no backup plan if something went wrong with the prisoners. When things did go wrong, nobody knew about it. Funk was 3 streets away, consolidating his makeshift platoon, dealing with the aftermath of house-to-house fighting, wounded men, dwindling ammunition, soldiers on the edge of collapse from exhaustion and cold. He had no idea that behind him, 90 Germans were about to turn a tactical victory into a tactical nightmare. The mathematics were brutal. Company C was operating with 30 combat effectives spread across multiple positions in a village they hadn't fully secured. If 90 Germans hit them from behind, from a direction they weren't watching, at a moment when they were exhausted and low on ammunition, it wouldn't be a fight. It would be a slaughter. The historical record shows what happens when units are hit from unexpected directions by superior forces. The results are consistent: shock, disorganization, catastrophic casualties, potential unit collapse. At Malmedy, just weeks earlier, 113 American soldiers had surrendered when surprised by German armor. They were herded into a field and executed. 84 dead. The massacre was still fresh in every American soldier's mind. If Company C collapsed under the German counterattack, survivors trying to surrender might face the same fate. The German officer in the Holzheim farmyard knew none of this. He didn't know about the four-man guard detail, didn't know about Funk's depleted roster, didn't know that Company C was held together by exhaustion and willpower. He only knew that luck had handed him an opportunity to turn defeat into victory. He ordered his men to move quickly, grab weapons, form up, prepare to assault. The 4 American guards knelt in the snow, disarmed, helpless, watching their captured prisoners transform into an attacking force. And that's when Leonard Funk walked around the corner. The crisis. The cost of necessity. Funk had come to check on the prisoners. Routine, standard procedure. Make sure the guards were okay, see if the promised reinforcements had arrived, confirm that the 80 Germans were still contained and controlled. He rounded the corner of the farmhouse and stopped. The scene made no sense for about half a second. Funk didn't speak German. He had no idea what the officer was saying, but he understood the situation perfectly. 90 Germans, half already armed, his 4 men disarmed and helpless. 1 other American beside him, equally helpless, equally outnumbered. The mathematics of survival were 0. Any tactical assessment would reach the same conclusion. Surrender is the only option. Fighting is suicide. The smart play, the logical play, is to comply, hope for prisoner of war treatment, and survive to fight another day. But Funk wasn't thinking about smart plays. He was thinking about Malmedy. 84 Americans shot down like cattle in a field. Prisoners who surrendered in good faith, executed by the SS. He was thinking about his 4 guards kneeling in the snow, about to be marched off or killed. He was thinking about Company C, spread across Holzheim, about to be hit from behind by 90 Germans because he'd made the decision to leave only 4 guards. This was his mistake, his calculation, his responsibility. The German officer screamed again, louder. His face was red. The MP-40 pressed harder into Funk's stomach, and Leonard Funk did something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. He started laughing. Nobody knows why Funk laughed. He later said he couldn't help it. Something about the German officer screaming in a language Funk couldn't understand struck him as absurd. Maybe it was stress. The human brain produces strange reactions under extreme pressure: laughter, dissociation, hyperfocus. Maybe it was calculated. A deliberate tactic to confuse the enemy, buy a few seconds, create an opening. Or maybe, in that moment, Leonard Funk simply recognized the darkly comic absurdity of the situation. He'd made a command decision that had created this disaster. He'd left 4 men to guard 80 prisoners because that was all he could spare. And now he was standing in the wreckage of that decision with a gun in his stomach, about to pay the price. The German officer didn't know what to make of it. Prisoners don't laugh. They beg. They plead. They comply. They don't stand there with a submachine gun pressed against their gut, cackling like they've heard the funniest joke in the world. For a few critical seconds, the German officer was completely thrown off balance, and Funk used those seconds. Still appearing to laugh, still appearing cooperative, He slowly reached up toward the M1A1 Thompson submachine gun slung over his shoulder. The German officer watched. Good. Finally, compliance. The American is surrendering his weapon. Funk's hand closed around the Thompson's grip. He began to unsling it. Slowly, carefully, convincingly. The German relaxed slightly. Then Funk moved. In one motion, faster than conscious thought, pure muscle memory from thousands of hours of training, he swung the Thompson down, brought the muzzle into line, and squeezed the trigger. The first burst caught the German officer in the chest. 30 rounds of 45 ACP in less than 3 seconds. The officer was dead before he understood what had happened. Funk didn't stop, couldn't stop. The moment he fired, he committed to a single outcome: kill everyone in range or die in the attempt. There was no middle ground. He pivoted, still firing. The Thompson's muzzle traced an arc across the Germans nearest him. Men screamed. Men fell. Blood sprayed across the snow. The 30-round magazine ran dry. This was the critical moment. A Thompson takes about 2 seconds to reload if you're well practiced. In a firefight against 90 men, 2 seconds is an eternity. Long enough for bullets to find you. Long enough to die. Funk yanked the empty magazine, slammed in a fresh one, racked the bolt, and kept firing. The whole sequence, empty, reload, resume fire, took less than a heartbeat. At the same time, he was screaming at his guards, "Pick up their weapons! Pick up their weapons!" The 4 Americans scrambled for the rifles dropped by the dead Germans. Seconds ago they were prisoners. Now they were fighting for their lives. The Germans were in chaos. Their officer was dead. The American who'd been laughing was now killing them with methodical precision. Nobody had given orders for this. Nobody had trained for the scenario where your prisoner suddenly becomes your executioner. Some Germans tried to fight back. Bullets cracked past Funk's head. One round killed the American soldier standing beside him. Funk kept moving, kept shooting, kept killing. His guards had weapons now. 5 Americans, 90 Germans. The mathematics still favored the Germans overwhelmingly, but mathematics don't account for shock. For surprise? For the psychological impact of watching your commanding officer get cut down, of suddenly being under fire from a direction you weren't watching, of confusion cascading into panic. 60 seconds. That's all it took. 21 German soldiers lay dead in the snow, 24 more were wounded. The rest, more than 40, threw down their weapons and raised their hands. The prisoners were prisoners again. Leonard Funk stood in the middle of the carnage, smoke rising from his Thompson, surrounded by bodies. He looked at his guards, shaken, blood-spattered, but alive. He looked at the recaptured Germans, terrified, demoralized, defeated for the second time in an hour, and he said quietly, "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." He wasn't talking about the Germans. He was talking about the decision that put 4 men in charge of 80 prisoners. His decision. The turning point. What the medals don't say. The official Medal of Honor citation for Leonard Funk reads, "He was ordered to surrender by a German officer who pushed a machine pistol into his stomach. Although overwhelmingly outnumbered and facing almost certain death, First Sergeant Funk, pretending to comply with the order, began slowly to unsling his submachine gun from his shoulder and then, with lightning motion, brought the muzzle into line and riddled the German officer." It's a story of individual heroism, courage under fire, quick thinking, and perfect execution. And it's true. But the citation doesn't mention why Funk was in that position to begin with. It doesn't mention that Company C was operating at 60% strength because the replacement system couldn't keep up with casualties. It doesn't mention that Funk had to use clerks and cooks as infantry because there weren't enough trained paratroopers available. It doesn't mention the impossible calculation that led to 4 men guarding 80 prisoners, not because it was tactically sound, but because there was no alternative. The Medal of Honor celebrates what Funk did after the crisis began. It doesn't examine why the crisis existed in the first place. By January 1945, the American army in Europe was stretched to the breaking point. The Ardennes offensive had consumed men and material at rates that shocked even veteran commanders. Entire divisions were ground down to cadre strength. Replacements arrived undertrained, under-equipped, thrown into combat within hours of reaching the front. The 82nd Airborne, an elite formation, supposedly kept in reserve for critical operations, was being used as emergency infantry, plugging gaps in the line, fighting battles they weren't designed to fight. This is what happens when operational tempo exceeds organizational capacity. You make compromises. You accept risks. You leave 4 men to guard 80 prisoners because that's all you have. And sometimes those compromises kill people. At Holtzheim, the compromise nearly destroyed Company C. It didn't. Not because the system worked, but because Leonard Funk refused to let it fail. He absorbed the consequences of a command decision he'd made under impossible constraints. When that decision created a crisis, he solved it with violence, quick thinking, and a willingness to die rather than surrender. The Medal of Honor was absolutely deserved, but the citation should have included a second line. Awarded for extraordinary valor in correcting a tactical failure created by insufficient combat strength. That's not how military decorations work, of course. We celebrate individual heroism. We don't highlight systemic failures. But the two are inseparable. Resolution and legacy. The quiet aftermath. After the war, Leonard Funk went home to Pennsylvania. He didn't write memoirs, didn't do the lecture circuit, didn't turn his Medal of Honor into a public career. He got a job with the Veterans Administration. For 27 years, he sat at a desk in the Pittsburgh regional office, helping other veterans navigate the bureaucracy, processing disability claims, cutting through red tape for men who'd given everything and now needed help getting what they'd earned. The same kind of work he'd done before the war. Quiet, unglamorous, necessary. When people asked about Holtzheim, about the 90 Germans, about the laughter and the Thompson and the 60 seconds of violence, Funk gave the same answer every time. Did what I had to do. That's it. That's all he ever said. Because for Funk, Holtzheim wasn't a moment of glory. It was a moment of necessity. He'd made a decision, 4 guards, 80 prisoners, that almost got his men killed. When that decision failed, he fixed it the only way available. Not through heroism, through violence. The Medal of Honor recognized his actions, but Funk understood what the medal didn't say. The crisis should never have happened. If Company C had been at full strength, there would have been 16 guards on those prisoners. If the replacement system had kept pace with casualties, Funk wouldn't have needed to conscript clerks and cooks. If the operational tempo had allowed proper rest and refit, the 82nd Airborne wouldn't have been used as regular infantry. Holtzheim was a symptom of a larger problem. An army pushed beyond its sustainable limits, held together by the individual competence of NCOs like Funk, who absorbed impossible situations and somehow made them work. Leonard Funk died in 1992. He's buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 35. A fitness center at Fort Liberty bears his name. A highway in Pennsylvania. A post office in McKeesport. But most people have never heard of him. They know Audie Murphy. They know Alvin York. They don't know the 5'5" sergeant who laughed at 90 Germans and killed 21 of them because command had run out of options. Here's what the story of Leonard Funk actually tells us. War doesn't favor the heroic, it consumes them. What looks like individual valor is often individual necessity. One person absorbing the cost of systemic failure because there's no one else to do it. Funk's Medal of Honor wasn't awarded for being brave. It was awarded for being competent enough and violent enough to survive a situation that should have killed him. A situation created by the arithmetic of command in a grinding war of attrition. 4 men guarding 80 prisoners. A reasonable decision. A catastrophic mistake. And 60 seconds of bloodshed to correct it.